At 2:47 a.m., October 20th, 2025, the frozen plains of Russia's Orenburg gas complex slept under a storm that clawed at steel and snow alike. Deep beneath that storm, the heartbeat of a nation throbbed, a vast labyrinth of pipes and pressure chambers pushing 500 million cubic feet of natural gas through the veins of Russia each day. It was an invisible engine that kept Moscow alive, keeping millions warm to the endless, punishing winter nights. Inside a dim-controlled bunker, the air smelled of diesel, metal, and fatigue. A single man sat before a flickering radar screen, its green glow dancing across his tired face. He sipped lukewarm tea laced with vodka, muttering to himself, "Just birds in the storm." What he didn't know was that for the last 112 minutes, he wasn't the hunter, he was the prey. Above him, Ukrainian drones watched every move he made, silent and patient, circling like shadows with purpose. In exactly 94 seconds, the quiet Russian night would erupt into a light so fierce it would be seen from orbit. $300 million worth of infrastructure, gone in a single heartbeat, all triggered by a drone that cost less than a used car. But how could this happen? How did Ukraine pierce the armor of what Russia claimed to be the most impenetrable air defense system on Earth? The answer rested in one deadly assumption, the kind that turns arrogance into ash. Those weren't birds, comrade. The approach, high above the storm, a Ukrainian UJ-22 airborne drone sliced through the blizzard, a ghost moving through curtains of snow. Beneath its wings hung 3 compact FPV drones known as Wild Hornets, small, lethal, and engineered for precision. Each carried a shaped C4 warhead hot enough to melt reinforced concrete and tear through steel like butter. It wasn't the size of the weapon that mattered anymore. It was the intelligence behind it. Using real-time AI navigation and the storm as a cloak, Ukraine had transformed nature into its greatest ally. The blizzard that once grounded aircraft now blinded Russia's defenses. The mighty S-400 missile system, worth $500 million, would soon be humiliated by a weapon costing a fraction of 1% of its price. For hours earlier, deep inside a hidden bunker near Kharkiv, a team of Ukrainian operators gathered around glowing monitors. They spoke in quiet tones, precise focus, confident. One of them, codenamed Viper, adjusted his headset and nodded. "Engines hot," he whispered. The Rotax 912 roared to life, a small, dependable engine tuned for war. Moments later, the drone lifted from the runway and vanished into storm-filled sky, carrying 45 pounds of destruction. It hugged the terrain at just 100 feet, gliding over forests and frozen fields, invisible to radar, inaudible to human ears. This was no reckless flight. It was a maneuver born from science and desperation, a tactic they called the Blizzard Phantom. The Phantom tactic. Ukrainian engineers had spent weeks feeding satellite data into AI systems, teaching the algorithms to read the storm like a book. They knew every gust, every wind shear, every thermal shift. The AI mapped a corridor of invisibility, where snow density, wind direction, and temperature would confuse Russian radar. Russia's Nebo-M radar array, normally sharp enough to spot a bird from 200 miles, became blind in the swirling whiteout. To the system, the UJ-22 was nothing more than a handful of lost birds. And while Moscow slept, the storm became Ukraine's camouflage. In that moment, the rules of winter warfare were rewritten. Ghosts in the blizzard. 350 miles inside Russian territory, the UJ-22 reached its waypoint. The belly doors opened. A single Wild Hornet dropped into the storm, not to attack, but to deceive. Instead of diving, it climbed, emitting false radar pings, dozens of ghost signals imitating a flock of large birds. The Russian S-400 locked on instantly, wasting precious cycles chasing illusions. Meanwhile, the real UJ-22 hugged the ground, weaving through valleys and tree lines, its AI reading air currents with surgical precision. Then the world went silent. For 90 seconds, Viper's control screen turned to static. Russia's Kasuka, 4 jammers unleashed electromagnetic chaos, severing communications, scrambling GPS. Most drones would crash. But the UJ-22 wasn't most drones. Inside its titanium shell, a custom 2024 AI navigation chip took command. It switched to inertial mode, using gyroscopes and accelerometers to calculate motion without a single external signal. Viper's hands tightened on the console as he whispered, "Come on, come back." 90 eternal seconds later, the feed flickered to life. The drone was alive and in perfect position. And now, Viper knew exactly where Russia's jamming systems were hiding. The counterattack. In the Orenburg control post, Commander Bear sat smugly in his chair, confident behind walls of steel and radar. "Our S-400 is untouchable," he said, his voice dripping with pride. But outside, his fortress was being circled by ghosts. When the radar feed began to blur, Bear's calm turned to fury. "Fire everything," he roared. "Panzer!" S-1 cannons screamed into the storm, pouring 5,000 rounds a minute into the sky, shredding clouds and snowflakes, hitting nothing but air. 10 miles away, the UJ-22 executed its final move. 2 remaining Wild Hornets detached, splitting into separate paths. One ascended, broadcasting decoy signals. The other dove low, hugging the frozen ground. The true killer. The decoy jammed the radar. The attacker locked onto a single target, an 800-foot gas silo brimming with compressed methane. The perfect weak spot. Bear's voice cracked over the comms. "It's below the radar." "That's impossible." Viper smiled through his headset. "Nothing's impossible." The impact. 43 seconds to impact. Russia's radar screens filled with digital ghosts. The S-400, built to track stealth bombers, was now chasing phantoms of its own making. 10 seconds. Viper steadied his hands. He flicked the arming switch. "Fly true," he whispered. A flash. Then the roar. The night sky turned white. A spear of molten copper tore through the silo wall, igniting methane in an instant. The explosion that followed was indescribable. A sun blooming in the snow. A shockwave tore through the steppe, flattening trees and buildings across miles. 3 silos detonated one after another, their flames clawing 1,000 feet into the sky. The sound reached Orenburg City 40 seconds later. Windows shattered, alarms screamed, and the horizon burned like dawn. The fallout. Commander Bear lay on the floor, ears ringing, glass scattered around him. His screens were black. His voice cracked with disbelief. The pride of Russia's defense, the S-400, had been defeated not by a nation's army, but by a handful of engineers and a few thousand lines of code. For 3 days, the Orenburg gas complex burned. Flames rose higher than the smoke from its own chimneys. Production dropped by 40%. 200 million cubic feet of gas vanished from the grid. Across Moscow, heaters went silent. Citizens woke to freezing apartments. Protests ignited in the capital, voices echoing through Red Square. Warm for the people. The financial hit was catastrophic. Energy exports collapsed. Neighboring allies began to question their reliance on Russian supply. And the world saw what arrogance had blinded, that intelligence, adaptability, and courage could wound a superpower deeper than any missile ever could. Even in the trenches, Russian soldiers whispered in fear. The ghost drones are coming. The legacy. Back in the Kharkiv bunker, Viper and his team watched the orange glow from hundreds of kilometers away. They didn't cheer. They didn't boast. They simply raised their cups in silence. Because they knew this wasn't just a victory. It was a message. A new kind of warfare had been born. The Orenburg gas plant, once the crown jewel of Russian energy, now lay in twisted ruins. Melted steel, shattered towers, and silence. All erased in less than a minute. This wasn't just an attack. It was evolution. The age of massive armies and billion-dollar defenses was fading. The future belonged to precision, to AI, to courage, and to the men and women who dared to fight with ideas instead of fear.